Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Knowledge of the absolute truth is not very easily understood by ordinary, less intelligent men. But if the spiritual master is kind enough to the disciple, however unintelligent the disciple may be, then by the divine grace of the spiritual master, everything is revealed. Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakura therefore says, Yasya Prasada, by the mercy of the spiritual master, the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan Prasada is revealed. Devahuti requested her great son to be merciful towards her because she was less intelligent woman and also his mother. By the grace of Kapila Deva, it was quite possible for her to understand the absolute truth, even though the subject matter is very difficult for ordinary persons, especially women. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Well, Prabhupada, I think he was asked a question about women, and he said, the general statement about women is correct, but devotee women are not unintelligent or not, let's say, not capable of understanding Krishna consciousness because they're practicing Krishna consciousness. They obviously are just as qualified as men to understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. But for fallen women who are engaged in illicit activities, it is nearly impossible for them to understand Krishna consciousness, just as fallen men also, it's almost impossible for them to understand Krishna consciousness. So, therefore, we should take shelter under a bona fide spiritual master or spiritual masters and learn the principles of Krishna consciousness and practice them. So it says here, knowledge of the absolute truth is not very easily understood by ordinary, less intelligent men. But if the spiritual master is kind enough to the disciple, however, until unintelligent the disciple may be, then by the divine grace of the spiritual master, everything is revealed. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura therefore says, Yasya Prasada, by the mercy of the spiritual master, the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavad Prasada is revealed. Devahuti requested her great son to be merciful towards her because she was a less intelligent woman and also his mother. By the grace of Kapila Deva, it was quite possible for her to understand the absolute truth, even though the subject matter is very difficult for ordinary persons, especially women. Well, that doesn't exclude women. It just says that basically everyone can understand if they surrender to bona fide spiritual master and follow the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness, then it's possible. Without that, it's almost impossible or virtually impossible to understand Krishna consciousness. Okay, text 31. Sri Maitreya said, after hearing the statement of his mother, Kapila could understand her purpose, and he became compassionate towards her because of being born of her body. He described the Sankhya system of philosophy, which is a combination of devotional service and mystic realization, as received by disciplic succession. Next verse, text 32. Lord Kapila said, the senses are symbolic representations of the demigods, and their natural inclination is to work under the direction of the Vedic injunction. As the senses are representatives of demigods, so the mind is a representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The mind's natural duty is to serve. When that service spirit is engaged in devotional service to the personality of Godhead without any motive, that is far better even than salvation. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The senses of the living entity are always engaged in some occupation, either in activities prescribed in the injunctions of the Vedas or in material activity. The natural inclination of the senses is to work for something, and the mind is the center of the senses. The mind is actually the leader of the senses, therefore, it is called sattva. Similarly, the leader of all the demigods who are engaged in the activities of this material world, the sun god, moon god, Indra, and others, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Let me read that again. Similarly, the leader of all the demigods who are engaged in the activities of this material world, the sun god, the moon god, Indra, and others, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so Krishna is the supreme leader of all senses and the leader of all the demigods. It is stated in the Vedic literature that the demigods are different limbs of the universal body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Our senses are also controlled by different demigods. Our senses are representations of various demigods, and the mind is a representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The senses, led by the mind, act under the influence of the demigods. When the service is ultimately aimed at the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the senses are in their natural position. The Lord is called Hrishikesha, for he is actually the proprietor and ultimate master of the senses. The senses and the mind are naturally inclined to work, but when they are materially contaminated, they work for some material benefit or for the service of the demigods, although actually they are meant to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The senses are called Rishika, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called Rishikesha. Indirectly, all the senses are naturally inclined to serve the Supreme Lord. That is called bhakti. Kapila Deva said that when the senses, without desire for material profit or other selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. That spirit of service is far better than siddhi, salvation. Bhakti, the inclination to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is in a transcendental position far better than mukti. A second. Let me read that again. Kapila Deva said that when the senses, without desire for material profit or other selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. That spirit of service is far better than siddhi or salvation. Bhakti, the inclination to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is in a transcendental position far better than mukti or liberation. Thus, bhakti is the stage after liberation. Unless one is liberated, one cannot engage the senses in the service of the Lord. when the senses are engaged either in material activities of sense gratification or in the activities of the Vedic injunctions, there is some motive. But when the same senses are engaged in the service of the Lord and there is no motive, that is called animita and is the natural inclination of the mind. The conclusion is that when the mind, without being deviated either by Vedic injunctions or by material activities, is fully engaged in Krishna consciousness or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is far better than the most aspired for liberation from, is far better than the most aspired for liberation from material entanglement. Okay, so basically, uh, the everything Prabhupada is explaining here is emphasizing the importance of pure devotional service. It should not be contaminated by any material desires. Then everything works properly. But when there is some, let's say, material desire mixed in with the devotional service, it's actually corrupted. And therefore, one ends up with mundane purposes of the tapasya that they're performing. So we have to be very careful not to have any material desires through the execution of devotional service. We should desire only to please Krishna and spiritual master and the devotees, and not have any other alternative purpose. When a person is corrupted by material desires, it's difficult for them to act purely in Krishna consciousness. It's just a fact. So therefore, it says here that again. The Pila Deva said that when the senses, without desire for material profit or other selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. That spirit of service is far better than siddhi or salvation. Bhakti, well, see, that's another important point. One time there was a devotee and he was writing a letter for initiation from Srila Prabhupada. And I told him, when you finish writing the letter, let me read it first before you send it to Prabhupada. So after he wrote the letter, he showed it to me and I read it. And I said, you can't send this letter to Prabhupada. You got to change some things. He said, why? I said, because you're asking Prabhupada or telling Prabhupada that you want to be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. That's not the real purpose of initiation. The real purpose of initiation is the desire to be engaged in devotional service without any material goal. So he said, then uh, uh, what is the real goal then? And I said, pure devotional service without any material, let's say, purpose. Uh, Being liberated is a material purpose. He said, how is that? And I told him, I said, look, if you simply desire to serve the Lord without asking anything else, that becomes pure devotional service. If you make a condition for your devotional service, it's not pure devotional service. So he was having difficulty trying to understand that. In other words, one should not have any ulterior motive other than to please the Lord. And if If it's necessary to please the Lord by eternally staying in the material world, but following Krishna consciousness, then that is also pure Krishna consciousness. Being liberated is not the actual pure, let's say, Krishna consciousness. Being engaged always in the service of the Lord without any material desire, such as wanting to be liberated, is, in a sense, a material desire. Then that complete dedication to service for the Lord without any other motive is pure devotional service. So it doesn't matter whether the devotee is in the material world or the spiritual world. If the devotee is engaged in devotional service without any motive other than to please Krishna, then it doesn't matter where they are geographically. What's important is their, let's say, their mindset that's perfectly satisfied serving Krishna, whether it's in the material world or the spiritual world. So liberation is a type of material desire, and therefore devotees will even are not actually asking for liberation. They're asking for service, and service is their connection to Krishna. Liberation is not necessarily their connection to Krishna. So when someone is free from material purposes and is only engaged in devotional service to please Krishna, then their situation is transcendental. So let's read this again. Sri Maitreya said, after hearing the statement of his mother, Kapila could understand her purpose, and he became compassionate towards her because of being born of her body. He described the Sankhya system of philosophy, which is a combination of devotional service and mystic realization, as received by disciplic succession. Okay, so the
which verse, Maharaj, is that?
that was 31. Okay, so 32 says,
Yeah.
Lord Kapila said, the senses are symbolic representations of the demigods, and their natural inclination is to work under the direction of the Vedic instructions. As the senses are representatives of the demigod, so the mind is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The mind's natural duty is to serve. When that service spirit is engaged in devotional service to the Personality of Godhead without any motive, that is far better even than salvation. So the key statement there is without any motive, meaning any material motive. So in purport, it says the senses of the living entity are always engaged in some occupation, either in activities prescribed in the injunctions of the Vedas or in material activities. So that basically one cannot stop activity, but one should strive for spiritual activity and not material activity. The natural inclination of the senses is to work for something, and the mind is the center of the senses. The mind is actually the leader of the senses. Therefore, it is called sattva. Similarly, the leader of all the demigods who are engaged in the activities of this material world, the sun god, moon god, Indra, and others, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is stated in the Vedic literature that the demigods are different limbs of the universal body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Our senses are also controlled by different demigods. Our senses are representation of various demigods, and the mind is the representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The senses, led by the mind, act under the influence of the demigods. When the service is ultimately aimed at the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the senses are in their natural. The Lord is called Rishikesh, for he is actually the proprietor and ultimate master of the senses. The senses and the mind are naturally inclined to work, but when they are materially contaminated, they work for some material benefit or for the service of the demigods, although actually they are meant to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The senses are called Rishika, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called Rishikesha. Indirectly, all the senses are naturally inclined to serve the Supreme Lord. That is called bhakti. Kapila Deva said that when the senses, without desire for material profit or other selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. Okay, let's stop right there. That's the real takeaway here. It says that when the senses, without desire for material profit or others, when he's talking about senses, he's talking about the eyes, the ears, the nose, and the mind, and the so you have gross senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and you have mind, intelligence, and ego, which are subtle senses. So here it says, when the senses, without desire for material profit or selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. That spirit of service is far better than siddhi or salvation. Let's stop with that statement. That, in other words, it's saying that spirit of service is far better than siddhi or salvation. So, in other words, a devotee is not really interested in liberation. The devotee is interested in service. But when you're serving Krishna without any material motive, you've already attained liberation and you've gone far above it because the real goal of life is to be always engaged in the service of the Lord. Either we serve our uh, senses or we serve Krishna's senses. If our real purpose in life is to serve the senses of Krishna, then we're actually a liberated soul. But if we are mixed, sometimes Krishna, sometimes myself, we haven't achieved the real goal of life. We're trying, but it's not pure. And if we're just serving our six senses, then we're just materialistic persons. So, therefore, everything depends on the motive. What is our motive? So that's why when this one devotee was writing his letter to Prabhupada, I told him, write a letter to Srila Prabhupada for initiating so you can get initiated. In the letter, he wrote that his real goal in life was to be liberated. And I read it and I said, you can't send this letter. He said, why not? I said, that's not the real purpose of life. Uh, you should write to Prabhupada in this and emphasize that you are very happy being surrendered to his divine grace and serving without any material motive. So at first it was a little difficult for him to understand why, because everyone in the material world is habituated to having selfish desires satisfied. But Krishna consciousness is not about satisfying your selfish desires. It's about satisfying the desires of Krishna and under the instruction of the spiritual master. So that's completely different than wanting to satisfy your senses or our senses. So I told him you have to rewrite this. You can't send a letter like that. Otherwise, Prabhupada will get upset with me, thinking I'm not teaching you properly Krishna consciousness. So he did correct his letter, and I read it also to make sure he had got the point right. So even here it says, when the senses, without desire for material profit or other selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. So devotional service begins when there is no desire, without desire for material profit or other selfish motives. Okay, so that says, Kapila Deva said that when the senses, without desire for material profit or other selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. That spirit of service is far better than siddhi or salvation. So that's why I told this devotee to rewrite his letter, because the whole purpose of his letter was he wanted to be liberated. And I told him, you can't send this letter to Prabhupada because he'll be up. He'll think that I taught you like that. You know, and I said that you maybe you have misunderstood what we're teaching. We're not teaching about uh, being liberated. We're teaching about being sincerely engaged in devotional service without any material motive. Liberation is a material motive. Yeah. And therefore it says the spirit of service is far better than siddhi or salvation. In other words, being liberated. Bhakti, the inclination to serve the Supreme Personality Godhead, is in a transcendental position far better than mukti or liberation. So there it is. Bhakti, the inclination to serve the Supreme Personality Godhead, is in a transcendental position far better than mukti or liberation. Thus, bhakti is the stage after liberation. Unless one is liberated, one cannot engage the senses in the service of the Lord. When the senses are engaged, either in material activities or of sense gratification or in the activities of the Vedic injunctions, there is some motive. But when the same senses are engaged in the service of the Lord and there is no motive, that is called animiti and is the natural inclination of the mind. The conclusion is that when the mind, without being deviated either by Vedic injunctions or by material activities, is fully engaged in Krishna consciousness or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is far better than the most aspired for liberation from material entanglement. Okay, it's far better than the most aspired. So most people want to be liberated, but by full engagement in Krishna consciousness or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of God, is far better than the most aspired for liberation from material entanglement. Okay, so if you write a letter for initiation, you say, I want to be liberated, that would be a mistake. But if you say, I want to be engaged eternally in the devotional service of Guru and Krishna, or Prabhupada and Krishna, that is the correct statement. Okay. Liberation is also a material desire, but the desire to be always engaged in the service of the Lord, that is a pure desire.
Krishna Maharaj, I have one question.
Yes.
So we say that the goal of our life is to go back to Godhead, right? But at the same,
Who says that?
no, we hear right, we hear in the
Yeah.
Bible saying that we should aspire to go back to Godhead.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in today's lecture, you said that it doesn't matter where the geographical location is. A devotee always aspires to serve Radha and Krishna.
Yes.
So, so there is going back to Godhead.
Is a material desire.
Goloka Vrindavan also is a materialism.
Well, you are in Goloka Vrindavan when you're always engaged in service of the Lord, right? And you're completely satisfied. You're not asking for anything else. Then Krishna takes care of everything. But if our purpose is to be liberated, that's a material desire. Our purpose is to be always engaged in service, whether in the material world or the spiritual world. That's spiritual desire. So there are devotees who, life after life, they're in the material world, but they're always engaged in devotional service. Right? So they're not disturbed by that, because if you engage in devotional service, you're with Krishna.
So, getting out of the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease, is that also a material desire?
Well, first of all, there's birth, death, old age, disease. Those are all material things, right? So one is not really interested in being liberated from them. They're more interested in being engaged always in devotional service, no matter what the condition is. Right? So we shouldn't worry about birth, death, old age, and disease, because we have an eternal soul. That's a mundane thing. We should be more interested in always being engaged in Krishna consciousness. That's a spiritual thing. So Krishna will take care of you, whether you're in the material world or you're in the spiritual world. So there are many pure devotees in the material world, right? They're not worrying about birth, death, old age, disease, and disease. They're concerned about spreading Krishna consciousness and helping, engaging in Krishna consciousness themselves and helping others by their example to be engaged in Krishna consciousness. They're not worried about staying in the material world or going back to the spiritual world. They're already in spiritual consciousness. That's the main thing. The consciousness is the main thing, right?
And in other words, one has some kind of selfish desire, even if it is going to Goloka or going out of this material world. I mean, basically, what I want.
Exactly.
Whereas
That's
the other
the
one,
statement. What I want.
yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. Whereas the Krishna consciousness is about
What
how
Krishna
can I please, yeah, Krishna, and what does he want?
Yes.
Whatever
Very
he
good.
wants is fine with me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have to thank your husband.
So in the initial device classes and all that stuff, so we say, okay, we came from spiritual world to material world, we did a mistake and we are here. And the purpose of our life is to realize our mistake and then and go back to Godhead. That's what is taught. So going back to Godhead, and then also getting out of this cycle of birth and death, old age, and disease. So that was taught. So, but as we read more in Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavad
Going back to God, well, being free of birth, death, old age, and disease is actually a material desire. Right? Being always engaged in devotional service, regardless of where It's where it could be in the material world eternally or in the spiritual world eternally. That is the real goal.
Only thing is, I think if you start the other way, initially people won't even. So you have to probably start from what they want. But as the consciousness probably improves.
How do they know what they want?
Yeah.
They don't really know what they want.
But in general, in the current material world, everybody wants something.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
You shouldn't want something. You should only be satisfied by devotional service. It could be in the material world or it can be in the spiritual world. Devotional service puts you in direct connection with Krishna. So whether you're in the material world or the spiritual world, if you're directly connected to Krishna through devotional service, doesn't matter where you are. You can be in the material world or you can be in the spiritual world. It's the same for the devotee. So there are devotees who are always in the material world, engaged in Krishna consciousness. And there are others that, are not functioning in the material world, they're functioning in the spiritual world. But both ways, you're connected to Krishna. Yeah. Okay. So we'll go to text 33. Bhakti, devotional service, dissolves the subtle body of the living entity without separate effort. Just as fire in the stomach digests all that we eat. So that fire in the stomach is usually considered to be hydrochloric acid, acids that burn the proteins, not burn, but are able to break down the proteins into what you would call, what is it called? In order to assimilate or get energy, you have to break down the food to what is it called?
Sugar, Maharaj?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Glucose.
Glucose. Yes. When you break down the food to glucose, then that's what gives you energy. If you have problems with your digestion and you're not able to break it down to glucose, therefore your body gets more or less sick. Okay, so text 33, it says, Bhakti, devotional service, dissolves the subtle body of the living entity without separate endeavor. Just as fire in the stomach digests all that we eat. Okay, so now why is it talking about dissolving the subtle body of the living entity? Well, the subtle body is still has many material desires, and they're subtle material desires, so they're more difficult to get rid of than the gross material desires. So, in order to dissolve the subtle body, so we have the gross body and we have the subtle body. The subtle body is full of desires and remembering all kinds of things that one has done in previous lifetimes even. So to dissolve that, actually to purify it, is real spiritual advancement. In other words, you might be able to become somewhat free of gross material desires, but if those desires are still in your mind, you're not really free yet. it's much more difficult to get rid of the corruption in the mind than the physical corruption. So how do we get rid of that corruption in the mind? It's by chanting loudly the Hare Krishna Maha. That's why we chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. That way we stop meditating on subtle sense gratification, and gradually it becomes purified by loud chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. What is the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra? It's associating with Krishna. There's no difference between the mantra Hare Krishna and Krishna himself. So by loudly chanting Hare Krishna, now we're also purifying the subtle body, which is the repository of many material desires. It's just the fact of life. But how to purify, like if our body is unclean, okay, we can buy soap and wash the body, right? If our mind is unclean, what is the soap for the mind? You can't go to a store and buy soap for cleaning the mind. The way to clean the mind is by chanting Hare Krishna. That's why it's recommended to chant at least 16 rounds a day of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And that is the real soap of the mind. So once the mind is purified by regulated chanting and engaging in devotional service, and eating only Krishna prasadam, then we begin to make real, tangible spiritual advancement. There's no soap for you can buy in a store to clean the mind. Because the mind is not a material thing. The material thing is the brain. The mind is not a material thing. It's very subtle. So to purify the mind, the only way is by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which goes beyond the limitation of material things to the most subtle things that are hindering one from becoming free of material desires. So the subtle desires are more difficult to get rid of than the gross desires, because you might stop engaging in gross sense gratification, but it's still going on in your mind. And the only way to stop that is by regulated chanting, and especially loud chanting. Eventually that will purify all the subtle desires that one may have. You can get rid of the gross desires, but the subtle desires are much more difficult. That's why chanting is recommended, loud chanting. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Not this silent chanting, because I don't know how devotees have learned to do that. Maybe someone said, well, it's no difference between chanting out loud or chanting silently. No, but there's a big difference. Okay. So
I mean, on this one, Maharaj, that I know that Shastra wise, some devotee, I think some preacher or whoever came here, they talked about there are three ways to chant. There is the japa, then there is it vachika, and then there is upamshu. So upamshu is like the silent, but it's not that that's the only way you do it, but it's like they say, like, depending on situation, you may do upamshu, which is like chanting in the mind, like depending on the situation. So But yeah, I agree. General recommendation is to chant loud. So
Did he say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But those three ways, japa is much more louder, and I think vachika is where you and the next person can hear, and then upamsha is just within your mind. So apparently that's there. I think it's Sanatana Goswami or one of those Goswamis described this three, but the recommended which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu always did is more
Loud chanting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're merciful, you'll chant loudly.
Loudly.
Right. If you chant silently, nobody really knows if you're really chanting or not. Right. And it's somewhat selfish to just chant silently. At the least, you should chant loud enough that someone can hear you. Right? And then the best is chant loud enough that everybody can hear you. That's why we go in Sankirtan and chant loudly, so everyone can hear. But just chanting silently, now you have to be careful because you can make mistakes by chanting silently. Because the same time that you're chanting silently, you could be thinking of other things. Right. So the best way is to chant loud enough that you can hear, and someone near you can also hear. That way, you're being merciful, and it's difficult for the mind to wander around when you're chanting loudly. It's not when you're chanting silently, your mind can wander around, and still, you're not really focusing very, let's say, in a let's say, very serious way in chanting, because your mind can wander when you're silently chanting. When you're loudly chanting, it's more difficult for the mind to wander around. Yeah. Okay. The conclusion is that when the mind, without being deviated either by Vedic injunctions or by material activities, is fully engaged in Krishna consciousness or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is far better than the most aspired for the liberation from material entanglement. So the desire for liberation is actually another type of material goal. So therefore, the conclusion is that when the mind, without being deviated either by Vedic injunctions or by material activities, is fully engaged in Krishna consciousness or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is far better than the most aspired. And what is the most aspired? For liberation from material entanglement. So the desire for liberation from material entanglement, although it seems to be a very good thing, is not really necessary. If you're always chanting and engaging in devotional service, you are liberated already. Liberation is not a geographical thing. You can be liberated even in hell if you're always chanting Hare Krishna. Haribol. Any questions or comments? So it's very nice. We learned today that when the same senses are engaged in the service of the Lord and there's no motive, that is called animita and is the natural inclination of the mind. The conclusion is that when the mind, without being deviated either by Vedic injunctions or by material activities, is fully engaged in Krishna consciousness or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is far better then the most aspired. What is the most aspired? What is that most people are desiring when they engage in spiritual activities? The liberation from material entanglement. That doesn't mean that we should desire material entanglement. It simply means that that desire is not really a pure desire. It's better than desiring material entanglement, but it's not actually pure. Pure desire is when there's no material desire, only the desire to please Krishna. Right? If you have no desires, that's what the Mayavadi do. They try and eliminate all material desires. But that's not the goal of life. The goal of life is to be free of all material desires by engaging in complete all desires to please the Lord. If you try and subdue all desires, then that is a negative position. But if you try to change the desires, the spiritual desires to please Krishna, that is positive, let's say, activity of the mind. And therefore, if you engage also in active devotional service, that's a perfection of life. Simply stopping material desires is not the ultimate goal. You can stop material desires for a certain amount of time, but you don't really become liberated from the cycle of birth and death. But by purifying your desires to have only pure desires to please Krishna, now you can become liberated from the cycle of birth and death. But even the goal of being liberated from the cycle of birth and death is a material desire. So the devotee doesn't care where they are geographically. They just care about serving the Lord without any material motives. They have a motive. Their motive is to please the Lord, but they don't have any material motive. The Mayavadis will say, well, no, you have to give up all motives, right? All desires. But the devotees don't give up the desires to please Krishna and engage in the activity of pleasing Krishna. The Mayavadis will say, no, you have to stop all activity and just focus your mind on the tip of your nose or on nothing also. How can you meditate on nothing? It's possible. But they try to do that. Or they meditate on the tip of their nose or whatever. Why don't you look up the definition of meditation? I mean, we've done this before.
It's a mental and spiritual practice aimed at achieving heightened awareness, focused attention, and inner peace. It involves training the mind to focus on a particular object, thought, or activity in order to cultivate mindfulness, concentration, and a sense of tranquility.
That's it.
This is ChatGPT's explanation.
You notice it doesn't mention Krishna.
Yeah, so in this case, it's like they say it could be focused on a particular object, thought, or activity.
Yeah.
So no Krishna.
Yeah. You see, that's a false. Hey, chat, whatever it is. They're giving wrong information. Yeah. That's the difference between reading Shastra and reading Chat. What is it? Chat.
Chat.
GPT.
GPT. What does GPT stand for?
It's a technical term. Let's see.
Chat GPT is also just collecting information from internet. It's getting fed the information.
Well, you've seen everything in the
Yeah.
internet is not necessarily the truth.
So this is the GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's an acronym for
Generative
Pre-trained Transformer. And you are chatting with it. It's a transformer. It transforms your, it's a kind of a technology that they call the transformers, but essentially takes the mapping of the data that it has and then converts into text. So they use it for different types of transforming, like it could be a code that you can transform into, it could be a language transforming. So, but it's essentially generative. It generates the text.
See, more specifically, GPT models are neural network-based language prediction models built on the transformer architecture. They analyze natural language queries, known as prompts, and predict the best possible response based on their understanding of language.
No mention of Krishna at all.
So this is just a technology.
Well, you see, that can be misleading.
So what it does in Maharaj, a lot of information is there in the internet, right?
Yeah.
So when you ask a question, it takes all that information and summarizes and it gives it to you.
Okay.
So if you search for something in Google, so you find different results. So you have to click on everything and read it, and then you have to click on the next one and read it if you don't find the answer. But what it does, it reads everything and summarizes and gives you a summary.
So it depends on if there's junk in, junk out. Means like if the thing that it is got trained on has wrong information, which probably is all the Mayavad explanations.
Yeah.
Then what it outputs is Mayavad explanations.
So if the content in the internet is more of Mayavad explanations,
Yeah,
then that content only it will present because it's just reading the content in the internet and summarizing it and giving it to us when we ask the question.
Yeah. See, that's
it doesn't have intelligence. I mean, it's
that's
not
like giving only materialistic answers.
yeah.
No spiritual answers.
We can actually build something nowadays. They allow wherein we can just take all Prabhupada's books, his room conversations, purports, everything, and then create a chat GPT like Ask Prabhupada.
Right.
Wherein it will not take any other body of knowledge.
Is there something like that?
I don't think so, but we can build one. So we should build it.
We should do it.
Yeah.
We
will do it. We'll take that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. You sure no one has done that?
You can look at that, but I don't know if it is there.
So then it only gathers all the information from Prabhupada books.
Yeah.
And then it summarizes and gives you the answer.
Which is going to be more bona fide. I mean, at least,
it has to be.
It has to be one.
Because it's only based on, because it has no way of thinking by itself. Only based
It's
on.
only what the input is.
Yeah.
The input is only pure Prabhupada.
Yeah, Prabhupada books.
So any question you ask, the computer will just mention things that Prabhupada said or done.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you feed only his room conversations, his books, his purports.
Yes, so then why would we want to, ask question to chat, whatever.
GPT.
Yeah. We should have a system where we only get answers from Prabhupada.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
ideally we should have that.
We can. They themselves given a way in which we can build these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can actually build. I know somebody who built something for kind of venture capital. There is a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
So anybody as an entrepreneur wants to know
Something about
something about how to raise capital or whatever. So what he has done is he's got a lot of his blogs.
Yeah.
So he fed to the model, and then now you ask a question, it gives what he would have answered.
So has anyone done this for Prabhupada's?
I'm just looking
I
up.
think they must.
They must be able to.
I don't know. I mean, it's not at least publicized. Yeah, see, while there isn't a specific version of ChatGPT that is exclusively focused on ChatGPT, is issued a Prabhupada. So it's, I mean, it doesn't seem like, that's a,
What?
I don't think it is there, but we'll look up and then see.
Yeah,
It will be a very great.
Yeah,
that would be a nice thing to
definitely.
focus on.
Yeah, we'll take that project out. And we can use that.
Haribol.
And every time we can ask questions in
Yeah.
our class also, what does
Yeah, get what did Prabhupada say about this? Yeah. Good. Haribol. Discovery.
Yeah.
Class is always a discovery.
Yes.
Haribol. Thank you very much. Over to Prabhupada.
Any other questions or comments online? If not, we'll see you in the evening.